Morning, guys. I'm here to help you through a few examples on your review worksheet today. I know some of us are still a little bit confused on the sine, cosine, and tangent inverse functions. And it tends to be a difficult topic, so if you still need help, you are not alone. You need to memorize these three implied domain restrictions. So remember, sine inverse and tan inverse are restricted between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. So think of those as the first and fourth quadrants. Cosine inverse is restricted between 0 and pi, okay? So the first and second quadrants. So when you get an answer, these always have just one answer. And that's the answer that your calculator would punch out if you did have it in radian mode and you wanted to check the answer. Okay, so again, you get faster at these, but the way that I kind of teach my class at first is to think of, remember going backwards, this means sine of what angle is 1/2. So knowing your unit circle, that's our pi over 6. And typically that would be, a sine is positive in the first and second quadrants. So it'd be pi over 6 and 5 pi over 6, but we're only concerned with sine inverse being in the fourth and first. So when the answer, the ratio is positive, that's what this means right here. It's the answer is going to be in the first quadrant. So sine inverse of 1/2, going backwards, is just pi over 6. Okay. Cosine inverse of 1/2, again, what you're thinking in your head is cosine of what angle? This represents an angle, is 1/2. Well, cosine's positive 2 places in the first and fourth, but it's only defined in the first and second. So this is where cosine inverse is going to be positive. And that, of course, is going to be our pi over 3. All right, number 3, cosine inverse of 2. So cosine of what angle is 2? Well, cosine and sine are only defined between values of -1 to 1, so this is an undefined value. So notice it says find the exact value of each expression if it is defined. This one is not defined. This has to be between -1 and 1. So undefined. Okay. So I think you guys can do the next few here. I was going to look at 6 and 9 here. Number 6, because they get a little tricky when they're negative. So cosine of what angle is -√3 over 2. So again, think of cosine is my x value. Where is x negative? X is negative in the second and third. So that means I'm talking about in the second quadrant. That's what this negative means. So that is going to be 5 pi over 6 in the second quadrant. Okay, so cosine of 5 pi over 6 is -√3 over 2. All right, sine and tangent are the most difficult when they're negative. Again, think sine of what angle is -√2 over 2. So that's our 45-degree reference angle. Sine is my y value. So where it's negative is down in the third and fourth. So again, only defined down here in the fourth. So a lot of people will make the mistake and say, oh, that's a 45-degree reference angle, so I'm going to go all the way over to 7 pi over 4. 7 pi over 4 is not between -pi over 2 and pi over 2. So you have to go backwards. It's a negative angle. And that's just the arbitrary definition mathematicians made up years ago. They took sine inverse to be defined between these two values. So you have to go backwards on the unit circle. Negative pi over 4 is just coterminal with 7 pi over 4. But it has to be between those two values. Okay. Also, some tricky ones can be tangents. So when you're looking at tangents and you see these √3s, think of your unit circle. I'm going to pull this up real quick. Tangent, remember, is always defined as your sine value over your y value. Or sorry, sine over cosine, which is your y over your x. Sine over cosine, sine over cosine. So you only get so many solutions for tangent and cotangent for that matter. So notice where tangent is 1 is at your 45-degree angles, right? And we talked about this in class, but you may have forgotten. Tangent is -1 at 3 pi over 4 because you're just taking these same values. And then, of course, you're either taking root 3 over 2 divided by 1/2 or 1/2 divided by root 3 over 2, which brings me to these here. When I see root 3, what students typically say is you know that that is the result of either dividing 1/2 divided by root 3 over 2 or the opposite. So at first, write them both out when you're working with tangents and see which one of those results in root 3. Well, it's this one, right? Because the 2's cancel, you get root 3. So what that tells you is the coordinate pair on the unit circle is, remember, this is my sine and my cosine. So you're looking for 1/2 comma root 3 over 2. Okay. So that's my 60-degree reference angle. And it's where tangent is positive. So again, tangent's positive here and actually down the third quadrant, which doesn't help us. It's the first quadrant. So that's just going to be pi over 3. Now the same answer here, but it's negative. So again, we're looking at where this coordinate pair, one of them is negative. Well, that's going to be in the fourth quadrant because I'm going to be going positive 1/2, negative root 3 over 2. That's what you're recognizing. So then when I take that ratio, I get negative root 3. So again, it's not going to be positive 5 pi over 3. We have to go backwards. The answer is going to be negative pi over 3. All right, I'll do a few more with you. Just kind of wanted, again, to look at 16. Like I said, when I see tangent inverse of 1, well, you just have to kind of memorize that. That's where sine and cosine are equivalent on the unit circle. So, of course, that's going to be our 45-degree reference angle. Root 2 over 2 divided by root 2 over 2, that's pi over 4. And since it's positive, of course, that's in the first quadrant. Answer is pi over 4. Okay. All right, last few. For some reason, these kind of get tricky sometimes for people. Sine inverse of 0. So sine of what angle is 0? Well, sine represents my y value. So on the unit circle, where is y 0? Well, it would be at 0, pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, every pi, but which one is defined for sine inverse? The only one is 0. It's the only one that lies between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. Cosine inverse, think cosine of what angle is 0. And again, notice I'm writing these out. You don't have to, but this helps a lot of people. If you can do it in your head, that's great, but I always kind of like to write it that way at first. Okay, so again, cosine is my x value. So where is x 0 on the unit circle? That would be up at pi over 2. 3 pi over 2, and I could keep going on forever and ever, anything coterminal. But remember, cosine inverse is only defined between 0 and pi. So the only answer we get is pi over 2. Okay. I hope that helps, guys. I know what is also difficult is our compositions of functions. That's going to be tomorrow's lesson, reteaching that. So we'll be looking at problems like these tomorrow, which are also a bit challenging. So hopefully get these down, and tomorrow we'll review those as well. I hope that helped. See you guys later.